This talk is about opening the mandala, and I'm going to dedicate it to someone, actually. Sometimes I do that, but there's someone very much in my mind at the moment who's recently died, called John Torrance. And he recently died. He finished writing his poetry book on the Thursday and died on the Friday night, which I think has some class about it and is probably quite indicative of who he is. But he was writing a poem, one of the last poems he wrote, and we got into some correspondence about it. And it's very much the theme of this talk. That particular poem was very much in line with this talk. And so he's been on my mind as I've been writing and preparing this talk. So it's about the mandala, and as I said last night, the mandala is a symbol. You can't exhaust the symbol of the mandala. And actually, it's quite difficult to write this talk because I kept on thinking of sort of, the meaning kept on sort of coming into my mind, and not just the meaning in an intellectual level. Even though I was sort of, listening to Bhante's talks and reading, as I said last night, a sort of academic paper on the origins of the mandala. It wasn't just intellectual ideas. I started to feel it very deeply in my being, and feel that I was part of a mandala writing this talk. And I thought, gosh, I just can't do justice to it. I just can't do justice to it. But I'll start anyway. We'll give it a crack, and hopefully the meaning will unfold for you over the weekend. It's not exhausted by this talk, or by any talk, really. So what is a mandala? A mandala is a sort of sacred circle. It's an arrangement around a central point. And yes, it's a symbol. It's sort of talking in kind of dream language and symbolic language, archetypal and emotional language, rather than trying to be a discrete philosophical theory. And to get a flavour of it, maybe we do have to travel back to early Buddhism. And in the early Buddhist texts, they talk about coming across the Buddha with his disciples. And the early Buddhist texts talk about how there'd be, for example, there'd be a forest. And to get to the Buddha, you'd have to walk through this forest, like King Ajatasattu is said to have had to leave his elephants behind, leave the great kind of train of people who had come with behind, and walk single file through the forest as it got darker and darker and quieter and quieter. And eventually he came upon a great clearing in the forest. And there was the Buddha seated in the center of a great clearing in the forest with all his disciples around him. And it said he faced towards the east and he shone like the sun in the midst of the assembly. So there we have an image of the Buddha shining like the sun in the midst of the assembly, all the disciples around him, facing him in silence, meditating, which must have been an extraordinary atmosphere, which indeed the text said it really, really was. That was enough to have a deep impact on King Ajatasattu and other followers who came across that. Apparently there was never a sound when the Buddha was meditating with his disciples. No coughing, no shuffling, no sneezing, just the Buddha shining like this sun with this great presence and all the Buddha's disciples around him. And there's another image, because it's not just the image of the Buddha in the center of the mandala. It's also how the ground was prepared for the Buddha. So it's said that this was Ananda's job, Ananda being the companion of the Buddha for a long, long time. And after the Buddha died, there's a very moving story, which was that at that time, the Buddha had spent most of his time at Savatthi, living in a monastic community in Savatthi. And he lived in what was called, it was a hut, he lived in a hut, but it was called the Gandakuti, which means the perfumed hut, because there were so many offerings for the Buddha, so many garlands, that it had a perfume about it, this Gandakuti, all the offering garlands. And if you go to India, you know that they offer these particular roses, quite small pink roses that smell utterly divine. And so the Buddha was surrounded by the smell of these roses. And it said that after he died, the Ananda went back to Savatthi, where the Buddha had spent the majority of his life, actually, the majority of his time. And the people of Savatthi came to see what Ananda was going to do. The Buddha had entered the Parinirvana. Ananda was his chief disciple. He had been close to the Buddha all the time for the last 25 years, something like that. And they watched and waited for Ananda to come back, and they were grief-stricken. You know, the Buddha had died, who'd shown them the way to reality, who'd shown them such kindness, who'd opened the doors to the deathless, you know. And Ananda came through, he walked through the people of Savatthi. He walked back to the Gandakuti, and he swept the ground, cleared away all the old offerings, removed any gravel or any rubbish that was around, any leaves or anything like that, prepared the ground, prepared the Buddha's seat, just as he did when the Buddha was alive. And I find that a very, very moving story of Ananda preparing the ground for the Buddha to come, even though the Buddha had entered his parinirvana. And that's the image we get from the early Buddhist texts, that in order to invite the Buddha, one must clear the ground, sweep the ground. And it's said that what you're doing at that time is you're sweeping the Mandala. The Mandala was originally the place for the Buddha, the place for the Buddha's arrival. And you sweep the ground and then you fill it with fragrant flowers and invite the Buddha. There's even a story about one of the Buddha's disciples who just couldn't meditate. He just was struggling to meditate. And eventually he realized that what he needed to do was create the mandala, sweep the ground around his shrine, and fill it with offerings. And then as soon as he could do that, then he could meditate, which I think is an interesting symbolism for us all, really. So that's how it originated. And Bhante quotes in Wisdom Beyond Words, Sangharakshita quotes from a Tibetan teacher who says, to make a mandala is to take any prominent aspect of reality and surround it with beauty. So I'll just go into that a little bit. So the first thing is we take an aspect of reality. And Sangharakshita says it's you take an aspect of reality you're attracted to, not as a form of craving, but as spiritual affinity. And I think what struck me when I read this about this description of the mandala is that Sangharakshita's confidence that we all have a spiritual affinity. He's not trying to tell you what to put in the center of your mandala. In a way, what he's inviting us to do is to trust ourselves that we know what we have a spiritual affinity to. And we take that aspect of reality that means something to us and put it in the center of our mandala. What's of value and meaning for us? And maybe we can't even explain why, but there it is, and we know it. We know it deeply. I can't tell you how you know it. I can't give you a clean formula by which you'll be able to tell what's most meaningful for you. You've got to know yourself. Sangharakshita says you find out what you really want to do, what is really of most importance to you. You clarify that, and then you organize the rest of your personality, the rest of your being, or other interests around that. So you take what is most important to you and you place it at the center. And I was thinking about the last year. We've all gone through in our different lives, in our different ways. We've all gone through this, or still going through this pandemic. And a lot has been stripped back for us in our lives. And I think what's happened in that process is that I've spoken to a lot of people who've actually, in some ways struggled with the lockdowns and the pandemic and haven't found it easy at all. But they've said, I've really learned something about myself. It's been very spiritually valuable. I'm kind of ready for that lesson to end now, but actually it's been very spiritually valuable because when everything's stripped back, we find out what's most important to us. What do we really miss? And I think when I talk to people about what they've really missed or what they've learned in this pandemic, they come back to universal human values. It's not just my thing that I miss. When we bring it back, it comes back to something that's deeply important to us as human beings. So when I talk to people about what they've really learned in the pandemic and about what's valuable to them, it's also about what's valuable to me. These are universal values. What's most important to us isn't really about us. It's about humanity in general. It's about life in general. It's beyond our own little world, but has the flavour of a wider humanity, the flavour even of life itself. So I think it would be good to talk in our groups about what we have learned over the last year and about what is most valuable to us, and to see the connections between what is most valuable to us in line with what is most valuable to others as well. And I'll just say a few things two things that I've really learned if I strip it all back. They're the same thing actually, but if I was going to sum it up, I'd sum it up in two words, which is connection and reverence. So what I've realized is really important to me is connection with others and the human bonds that keep us together. In the past year, I've been close to people who've experienced bereavement and death, illness, and having a baby, and that other side of life. And in those things, I think what's really difficult in the last year is not being able to physically move towards people in those kind of important life events. We just want to be with each other. And Zoom and this kind of communication is largely verbal. It means that we're reliant on what we say. But actually, it's not enough for us as human beings. It's not enough. When my friend had a baby, my instinct is to go and see her and to hold the baby and to welcome the baby physically into the world. We want to, when my mother's experienced illness, it's not enough for me to say, well, Mum, can you describe the symptoms to me over the phone and let's have a chat about it. I want to be able to go and be with my mother. I want to hold my mother. I want to cook her dinner and say, let's watch a movie together and put my arm around on a sofa, I want to be able to rub her feet. There's something about wanting to be able to just be with each other. And verbal communication in Zoom has gone much further than I thought it would go. We've been running a lot of retreats here, and we've been really impressed by the depths that we can achieve on those retreats. But actually there's comes a point when we want to be physically with each other. So there's something about those human bonds of connections where we want to come together. When someone dies, when someone's ill, when someone has a baby, we want to come together. And of course, ordination as well, which, we had to cancel the long ordination retreat last year. And there is something about there's certain life events that can't be done on Zoom and on our own. And that carries on this year. I know some of you on this retreat are getting ordained this year, and and it hasn't been able to be completely in person as we would have wished. We'll do well with it. We'll do well, but it does make you realise, yes, there's something about retreats about just hanging out over a tea break or going for a walk together. So there's connection and there's also reverence, because connection is not just about connection between people, but with life itself. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I was reading some Tibetan things about what the cause of the pandemic is, and some of the things coming from the Tibetan Buddhists. And from the Tibetan Buddhist point of view, pandemics, illness are caused by obstructive spirits. Usually obstructive spirits in natural places whose habitat has been disturbed. and who then come back at human beings in the form of a pandemic. And one might dismiss this as somewhat hippie-ish, of which I have that tendency. But actually, in fact, that's what we found out actually did happen in the investigation of what caused COVID-19 to spread. They said, well, part of it was about population expansion and the encroachment on the natural habitat, disturbing bats, I assume. So in a way, the Tibetans weren't wrong. So what that made me think, and I think what we've all learned as well, is our lives have slowed down and we haven't gone around doing so much, and we haven't been able to have as much sort of distraction in particular ways as we used to, is a sense of wanting to reverence life itself that we live in, and have an appreciation for life as it exists beyond ourselves, you know, myself as a human being and ourselves as humanity, even as human beings. And it reminds me of that line from Bante's poem, Life is King, where he says, life does not belong to us, we belong to life. And if we're going to enter into the Mandala, we have to respect life. If we're going to build a new world, we have to respect life beyond ourselves, and feel that we're part of something much larger. Human beings don't own this planet. And we've seen that, you know, once a pandemic starts. I think what's made me really sad recently is the competition about vaccines. Because, of course, if the pandemic is somewhere in this world, it's everywhere, you know. We have to work together as a humanity. And when we work together as humanity, we can achieve much more. And when we work together with the environment, we can achieve much more. And I don't want to go back to a life that exploits the natural world or even other people purely for our own benefit. You know, I was watching also a program about the workers at Amazon who work 10-hour shifts and can't even go to visit the toilet when they need a break for fear of being fired. You know, so I think I don't want to go back to that world. I want to go back to a world that has a respect and an admiration for all forms of life and for life itself, for the planet itself and the environment. We're part of society, we're part of life, we're part of the earth, we're part of the universe, and we must live a life that knows that we have an effect on each other and an effect on our wider environment. So yes, so part of what's really important to me is reverence for myself, reverence my own spiritual potential, reverence to other people, and reverence to the natural world. So what is important to us, and how do we imagine that, and how do we image that? It's easy to say the 3 jewels, you know, like I'm going to draw your mandala for you and I'm going to stick 3 jewels in the middle. But of course, it's not like that, is it? We've got to imagine it in our own way. You know, maybe it is the Buddha shining in the midst of the assembly. Maybe it's the Vajratara, that point of stability and depth and potency. And the Bodhi Mandala around the Vajratara. For myself, I think, well, what image do I come back to? And the image that I come back to that feels like the Vajratara, that feels like that kind of weighty, stable point, is actually for me the image that I have of Sangharakshita's death and being with his body at Adhisthana, which is a very precious opportunity. And with him in that place, what I really knew what my life was about. And in a funny kind of way, I had this absolute certainty. My life and everything in it is going to be okay. And whatever decisions I make, I know that they are in reference to my teacher and are an offering to my teacher. And I felt blissfully happy. And it's not because, you know, Sangharakshita and I were very, very good friends. I mean, we got on well. He teased me quite a bit, which I thought was a good sign. But I think it's what Sangharakshita represents to me in my psyche. That's kind of my central point. And I don't really understand why it is. We both grew up in the same area of London, in Tooting, which we used to talk about. Actually, I was born round the corner from the LBC. So I sort of think I like to think I've got a common connection with Sangharakshita. It's probably not true, but anyway. But there's a sense of like feeling his roots, because they, you know, we grew up in a similar area of London, although he was fond of pointing out to me that we're a different class. But anyway, we won't go into class politics right now. So we grew up in the same area in London. There's a kind of rootedness, and then there's also this vast mind, which was nothing to do with Tooting. So I remember having a dream where I've told some of you this, that I went into this room and there was Bhante contemplating an enormous red lotus made out of light. And I knew, I didn't quite understand what the red lotus meant, but I knew Bhante did, and I knew that that was enough for me. So it's that combination, I think, between a kind of rootedness in life, in the earth, in our own conditioning, and the potential of a vast mind, a vision of the red lotus. So yes, we need to find that central point and surround it with beauty. If it's important to us, we create a world in relation to it. We sweep the ground, we cover it with flowers, we let it perfume our lives. And Bhante calls this the mandala of aesthetic appreciation. So it means that we learn to see things in relation to our central ideal, without just in terms of what we're kind of grasping from them, not a utilitarian value. But it's a kind of attitude where we can step back and see everything as part of this greater mandala of aesthetic appreciation, within this larger sphere. So that even, you know, normally we divide our practical activity in, for example, our Buddhist or spiritual activity. But Sangharakshita is saying, no, you just imagine that everything is in relation to the ideal. Everything is an offering to the ideal. All practical activity, for example. And one can have this experience where, for example, sometimes I take on a conscious practice that everything is an offering to Tara. White Tara, my yidam. Everything that I do, you know, whether it's cleaning a loo or putting out food for a retreat or writing a talk or whatever it is an offering to Tara. Taking the kids to school, emails are an offering to Tara. Probably the least likely thing to imagine as an offering, but they are. So yes, it's good to reflect on what is beautiful in ourselves, what is beautiful to ourselves and to the world, and what is our offering to the center of our mandala. What do we offer it? And of course, the mandala offering practice is a dramatic enactment of that, and that's what we'll be doing this evening. So you'll really get a flavor of that. It does transform your consciousness, doing that mandala offering practice. It's always unfolding, and the image of creating this mandala is the early image for creating a pure land where every sound is the sound of the Dharma, every touch, every smell, every sight. But of course, when we're doing that, when we're creating the pure land, where we're surrounding that central point with beauty, we also come across what we find perhaps unbeautiful. So there are experiences that we have that are harsh or dull or shocking, experiences that, and interests even, that are not immediately beautiful, that we'd rather leave to the edge of the mandala, or we'd rather just didn't really, you know, we've kind of got our nice Buddhist life, and then there's those un-Buddhist things we've classed as un-Buddhist. And it's a bit like what do we want to keep a secret? What do we want to keep a secret from the mandala? We've got this beautiful mandala with a Buddha in the middle, and then we've got this funny little area that, like the borderlands of the mandala. And what happens is, Bhakti talks about this with the image of the mandala. He says, well, what happens usually is we have a split in our psyche. We have a split between our rational mind and our ideals. And what's actually going on in our emotional life. So we can abstract our ideals. We can think what we should do to be a good Buddhist and have that as a kind of abstract desire and an abstract thought in a way and ideal of what we're moving towards. But if we start to make it too abstract, the advantage of human consciousness is you can have an ideal that you're moving towards, and maybe even though you're not quite there yet. But if you make it too abstract, you can form a split between that ideal and the center of the mandala and what's actually going on in your life. So what we need to do is to bring everything into the mandala, to cease that split, but bring everything into the kind of wider consciousness of whatever is in the center of our mandala. Renunciation isn't about a kind of labored giving up and splitting off from ourselves what we don't like about ourselves, a kind of what Bhante calls a premature synthesis. It's about bringing everything into awareness and allowing it to be transformed in the light of our higher vision, our central vision, and allowing the mandala to include and reconcile everything. So to give you an example of that, one might be, perhaps I am a little, sometimes have been, a little bit secretive about sexual relationships and the romantic myth. So you can counter that as like it's very, very central to us as human beings. And what we can do is we can think, well, that's not very Buddhist. Because if I was a proper Buddhist, I'd want to be a nun. But of course, that's such a strong kind of image, is such a strong myth that it kind of goes on in our consciousness, and actually we're acting it out a lot of the time. Particularly for people who aren't practicing brahmacharya, who haven't taken the vow of celibacy. Actually, for a lot of our mental preoccupation can be to do with the romantic myth and sexual desire. So what do we do with that? And it's been a question for me throughout my Dharma life. I came across the Dharma when I was a teenager. So most of my major relationships have been within the Sangha, which makes order conventions sometimes interesting. But yeah, so what do we do about that? I think for myself, what I've tried to do about that is to be less secretive. I have got a desire to be a bit secretive about my sexual relationships and the amount of investment that kind of goes on in my mind around that. So to not be secretive about it, but also to make my relationships progressively more skillful, to allow them to come into the mandala and to become progressively more skillful and healthy and positive, a positive adornment to the Bodhi mandala, rather than a thing that I feel a little bit guilty about or something like that. So maybe that's what you keep a bit secretive. Maybe there's another issue. I'm just using that as an example to show you the principle. It's about bringing everything in, everything, all those interests. Even if they're unskillful, well, they need to be investigated. They still need to be brought into the light of the mandala, which might mean talking to your friends about them and helping you to uncover the deeper desire behind that unskillfulness, which is usually actually positive. I haven't got enough time to really go into that, but even those unskillful habits that we have, if they're brought into the light of the mandala, they can be transformed, and often there's a deeper longing underneath them, which is spiritually positive. So yes, we can't force our lives into a pure land. Beauty can't be forced or insisted upon. We can't squeeze our life into the Pure Land. When I was preparing this talk, for some reason, a little quote fell out of my book that I've obviously written down at another point, which is from George Eliot and the book Adam Bede, which is one of my favourite novels. She's one of my favourite authors as well. And she says, human feeling is like the mighty rivers that bless the earth. It does not wait for beauty. It flows with resistless force and brings beauty with it. Say that again. Human feeling is like the mighty rivers that bless the earth. It does not wait for beauty. It flows with resistless force and brings beauty with it. So human feeling is the mighty rivers, and at the center we have what's most important to us. And in a way we can imagine that what's central in our mandala is like the queen of the mandala, drawing all emotions towards it, everything that is in our being. It's an image of wholeness. And you just allow that to be drawn to the center. Sometimes quite a mysterious process, but the center of the mandala is kind of like a force, drawing everything to it. And the beauty comes in that process, not in a kind of imposition of an idea of what should be beautiful. So the mandala is an image of harmony. Everything becomes integrated. And it can become integrated because there's a central point. Life has a pattern, and it's an harmonious pattern because it's in relation to the center. And sometimes that pattern is revealed over time. Sometimes you don't get an immediate sense of it. Bhante says a mandala is a vision of the world, a pattern of reality that lies beyond what is apparent in everyday life and thought. He says it's also a bit like a carpet that's revealed slowly. You start to get an image of the pattern, but as the carpet is drawn back, then you get a vision of the whole picture. And it's interesting that was the image that I talked to John about towards the end of his life. And I think he was quite struck by that image. Of course, it's not mine, it's Sangrashta's, but I can see that at the end of your life, perhaps the pattern is starting to become a bit more revealed, and you can see that your pattern is also part of a bigger pattern of reality itself, of life itself, of your relationships, of your world. In a way, it doesn't really matter what that pattern is. What we have to concentrate is what we're putting at the center. That's what we concentrate on, and let our lives become influenced by that. And in a way, for me, this idea, Bhante also says, he says it's a vision of the world, a pattern of reality that lies beyond what is apparent in everyday life and thought. So it's beyond what is immediately apparent. And I find this a vision of kind of sacredness. I had an experience on solitary a few years ago, which I'm really struggling to put into words, but the only word I can think of describing it was sacredness, where there's no separation in your life between the sacred and the mundane, because everything is meaningful. Everything is part of this greater whole of meaning and purpose and beauty, and therefore everything is kind of sacred. Holiness, wholeness. So in Buddhism, I was thinking, well, what is the equivalent in Buddhism for sacredness? And actually, Sangrashta talks about the 5 eyes. In Buddhism, we have the opening of the 5 eyes, and we have the fleshy eye, as in the eye. We have the divine eye, the Dharma eye, the all-seeing eye, and the Buddha eye. And the divine eye, the Divya Shakshu, Divya means means divine. Sangrashta equates to the imagination. And he says is the opening of the divine eyes when you see the world with a higher imagination. And you see, it's the basis of ethics, because you see how everything is part of life itself, of this kind of constant process of becoming. And you behave ethically because you don't want to get in its way. So he said to really practice ethics, we need to open this divine eye to see everything with the eye of the imagination. So we need to look at how we open that Dharma eye. Where is that sense of sacredness? Where do we find it? You know, that's why retreats are important, because you can enter a state in retreat or in meditation itself where everything has profound meaning, connected to what's most important to you. And really, it's a feeling of sacredness. Pujas are the same thing. So yeah, where do we find sacred? Where can we draw on what's sacred? And imagine if we saw our whole lives as sacred, not just our life, our pattern, our mandala, but the whole of life as sacred. What would it be like to live in a sacred universe where everything is part of a pattern waiting to be revealed? You know, it's very easy in this modern age to live in a dead universe where, you know, consciousness is just an epiphenomenon of the brain, and matter is dead and inert and just biological, physical processes, relating to nothing outside of ourselves and no guiding principle. That is horror. That is horror. To live in a dead universe with no guiding principle and nothing beyond ourselves and our immediate interests, where the only real value is immediate pleasure. You know, what kind of mandala will we live in if that's the way we saw our lives? And of course, what Buddhism does, and a lot of religious traditions, but Buddhism itself is it invites us to live in a world of magic and color and light and meaning and beauty, where everything is like a kind of lotus emerging from the mud, reaching towards the light. The mandala also means a lotus, an opening of a lotus, a process of unfolding. So we can see our lives in this way as sacred, and see it not just as one mandala, but as intersecting mandalas. So we have in the tantric tradition the external mandala, the internal mandala, and the secret mandala. So I'll just say a few words about that before I finish. So we live our lives in the context of the mandala of the world, the external mandala, life getting on with itself. And I was lying in my bed the other night, and I was just listening. I've tried to take on a bit more of a practice of just listening, and listening to the owls outside and the river outside. And I had this sense that in the darkness, in the night, life is just getting on with itself, without my in particular interference. That it's alive from its own side. You know, there's the whole world, the nocturnal world, that if you know Triratna is going on by that river in that woodland outside my window, which has got nothing to do with me. It's alive from its own side. And in traditional Buddhism, we would see the natural world as being inhabited by devas and devis, as gods and goddesses. And it's not because, like, you know, Buddhism is a kind of, you know, sort of pre-literary society or something like that. It's a vision. It's a vision of the Divya Chakshu, where everything is alive and potent, full of life, full of mystery, full of presence. And that presence becomes devas and devis. If the world is alive, the world responds to us. If the natural world is full of devas, or even the unnatural world, so sometimes I do talk to devas, because I think if you're alive to that kind of presence, it responds. There's a response there going on, and I realise that my sort of there's also devas in the unnatural world, you know, in the city, and I grew up in the city, so I think the devas that I'm more familiar with are the devas of the concrete and the paving stones and kind of city centre parks, but they're there. Don't take me too literally. I don't take myself too literally. But anyway, yeah, so we imagine that the world is full of presence and alive, Davies and Davies. I think imagining the world is full of Davies and Davies is actually probably really quite healthy. It leads to a better life, really. And it also leads to this sense of wanting to improve the world, make the world a better place, because you have what I talked about before, this kind of natural reverence towards it. We want a more loving world, a more dignified world, where beings can live out their full potential. And sometimes one can get a sense of that. There is an exercise where you just, okay, imagine that everything is in this greater mandala of kind of sacredness or aesthetic awareness, a pure land, and all beings are gods and goddesses in that mandala, and all trees and all flowers. And you can even imagine that you know, where are the devas in this landscape? And if you do that, it's an exercise. It's very interesting, particularly that thing, okay, all beings are gods and goddesses in pure land, and you're in that pure land. Well, how would you relate to them? And how would you relate to the natural world? You'd relate to the natural world, you'd relate to other people, you'd relate to those little strange sacred places with dignity and reverence and kindness and respect. And I think that's a very beautiful way to live a life. I mentioned Dr. Ambedkar yesterday, and he said, you know, in order to achieve a just society, in order to live in a better society, the central principle is what he said is fraternity, which is another word for Maitri, which is another word for love. He said that has to be the basis for a just society. So we're not talking about some sort of strange hippie imagination of Vajratara on a Sunday afternoon. Actually, this is the basis of respect and of dignity and of the unfolding of a positive society. It's a deep, deep rooted view that everything is important and of value, and that it can't be exploited by personal profit or gain. And it enables the transformation of society. You know, Dr. Ambedkar tried everything to improve the society for his people. And he said what really makes a difference is this transformation of heart and mind, at the root of which is metta. That is the only thing that's going to change that society. And that's why he was so keen on the spread of Buddhism, because it gives a direct method for cultivation of metta, of Maitri. And he said, you know, it's not just the duty of a Buddhist to be a good Buddhist, it's the duty of a Buddhist to spread Buddhism, because it's the force of goodness in the world. And he really, really did believe it, because it allows this conscious cultivation of love, of fraternity, of seeing all humanity and all life as one. So there's the external mandala, and then there's the internal mandala. And the internal mandala is to see our world as a network of relationships and friendships. And the people that we know, the people that we love, the people that we don't love quite so much, the people that we work with, live with, all the network of relationships and friendships in our lives, our families, our friends. And to cultivate within that a patterning of harmony and a patterning of love and openness, and encouraging other people and ourselves to blossom, to unfold in our full potential. And what's great about the order, so you've all asked for ordination, and what I find really wonderful about the order is that I'm not alone in that creation of a mandala. If I tried to create a mandala on my own, a mandala where all beings could flourish, it would be very, very limited. But of course, I don't feel I am on my own doing that, because I'm also working with others whose central point of their mandala really is the central point of my own. So it's not that everyone in the order would imagine the center of their mandala as Sangharakshita, after he died in that shrine room at Adhisthana. We'll all have our own ways of imagining it. Some people, much closer to Sangharakshita than others. You know, you could imagine it as a Buddha or Bodhisattva figure, for example. But at root, I know that every order member has that central vision that I share. It's a kind of wordless, imageless value, and that I can trust that. And if I can trust that, we can work together to create a larger mandala on the basis of shared principles and ideals. And to find that in one's life is honestly the best thing that could happen. The best thing that could happen. And of course, that's what we're also doing in Buddhist centers. You know, Sangha to call Buddhist centers the kind of garden in the wilderness. And that's how I felt, you know, when I first came along to the Buddhist center, full of my own ideas and half-baked theories about the world. And then coming to a Buddhist center where I was taken seriously, and we could talk about those kind of things. And we could develop a practice where we're working on our own minds directly to cultivate love and awareness. And to find that when I first came to the Buddhist center and we did the Metta Bhavana, there were just tears pouring down my face. And it wasn't because I was like in the depths of dhyana or, you know, had some major realization. It was that these people had the same vision that I had, you know, that they would spend their Tuesday evening cultivating metta. How extraordinary to find that. And I felt like I'd been waiting, you know, for so long to find someone who shared my vision. It was a wonderful moment, a real central moment in my life. And I remember thinking, wow, this is it. And really haven't changed my mind at all. And, you know, it's been a while. So yeah, so the cultivation of the internal mandala of friendships and relationships is not always easy. We don't always get on. But if we come back to the basis of our shared ideal, what we can do together will be much more potent and much stronger. We have a common project. And then we have the secret mandala. So the secret mandala is the mandala of the mind, the mandala of creation of a mandala within our own minds. We ourselves are sacred, our own minds, our own bodies, our own hearts. We ourselves are the Vajratara. We ourselves are at that critical point between the effects of past actions and the cultivation of future actions. And yes, this very place, the lotus paradise, this very body, the Buddha. So it's seeing ourselves, seeing our own minds with the divine eye. And of course, within the mind, as I said before, there'll be the unbeautiful. There'll be images that arise, for example, in meditation, from the depths. It's an image of integration, the mandala, and images come up from the depths of our mind that can be shocking or difficult or painful to experience. But one brings them into consciousness. Actually, Buddhism is a very, very subtle understanding of the mind. And at root, some of those things are the desire for existence and the desire for non-existence. You know, images of longing for death, images of fearing death, images of sex or violence, all those things that come up in our mind are actually indicative of a deeper longing that's waiting to be integrated. So we bring everything in our minds into the center in relation to the center of our mandala, in relation to the center of our deepest ideals, the red lotus, and allow the red lotus, the light of the red lotus, or the light of the Buddha, to transform all those things, you know, not leaving anything out. So just as there are the painful depths, there's also the positive depths. There's also within our own minds a complete positivity and unfolding of love that's hard to bear. And it's hard to bear because it feels beyond ourselves. We touch into something in the capacity of our mind is even beyond our normal consciousness. And there are depths to our mind that feels beyond anything we've known before. And that can even be terrifying. I think I'm more terrified by the strength of my own positive emotion than I am by my negative emotion. The negative emotions are quite familiar to me, But the depths of my own positive emotion, that's what really freaks me out. That's what I find very hard to bear. So we bring that as well into the light of the mandala. And of course, the external, the internal, and secret mandala are not separate. They're one harmonious flow. And the mandala is an image of that kind of intersecting mandala, if you like, of everything becoming smaller or larger within itself. So the little flower is a mandala unto itself as part of the bigger mandala of life, as part of the mandala of universes coming in and out of existence. And we had that lovely reading this morning from Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, where he says, the figures of the mandala are the day-to-day objects of one's life experiences, moving in the great dance of the play of the universe, the symbolism by which the guru reveals profound and ultimate meaning and significance. And this is very much the Vajrayana way. The Vajrayana way is to see everything as the dance and play of the mandala, of energy moving here as the external elements, the external world. Here is the relationships and the mutual responsiveness between us as human beings. And here as the manifestations of our own mind and consciousness. And everything being part of the play of the universe, the play of energy. In the Vajrayana, you imagine it also as a manifestation of the Guru or the Yidam, the manifestation of the Buddha's, the brilliance of the Buddha's higher awareness. And if you imagine your experience like that, I tell you, it's wonderful. I can't describe it. It's like everything takes on a kind of meaning and potency and profundity. And all that's left for you to do is to dance with that energy, dance with that vision in unfolding of ethical behavior and beauty and kindness towards everything that you meet, whether it's yourself in your own mind, or whether it's your relationships with other people, or whether it's relationships with the whole world. So Sangharaj also says, Milarepa finds a sacred mandala in the world around him, wherever he is, whatever visions come to him as the activity of his own mind. So it's not that the mandala is something added on to our consciousness. Our consciousness moves within the mandala. It moves within that sense of sacredness. And whatever visions that we have, and it's all visions of our own mind, whether it's external, internal, or secret, it's all visions of our own mind. And whatever visions appear to us, we find them within a sacred mandala. Good. So, yeah, it's easy to lose sight of that in the modern kind of way of being. But I think it's really good to come back to that. What would it be like if we were to build the world on the basis of that vision, and to build ourselves and our own future, our own mind on the basis of that vision? So how can we make our lives a mandala? Well, it depends really on what we put at the center. How do we clarify what's at the center? That's the central question for us that we'll explore in the groups. How do we clarify what's at the center? What do we need then to find place within the mandala? And what do we need to kind of remove or bring into the light of that mandala? Is there anything we want to leave out? And why do we want to leave it out? And what would it be like to put that thing in the mandala and just let it be transformed by the mandala? So yes, we have that mandala, making everything an offering. And just invite you this weekend to spend time in sacredness, wherever the sacred is revealed to us, whatever feels sacred to you, nature, puja, meditation, shrine rooms, all that activity, and every activity we take, whether it's the washing up or looking after the kids, or whoever's at home and your interaction with them, to see them as taking place within this sacred mandala. And we'll build a new world on the basis of that.
That was absolutely wonderful, Vajratara. I was half wondering whether we could do something a bit crazy and unmute ourselves and just give a clap. I think you've really evoked something. I think this is going to really help us. You've not only kind of helped us enter the mandala, but it might just be nice to just really rejoice in you. You know, part of that is giving thanks as well. So anyway, it might be a bit weird. If you want to unmute and give a clap, just go for it.
That's good. We can have another.
Wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Set us up really, really well.
So, Shandavadri, what is it about Triratna Loka that you think we should be telling these people in order to inspire them and get them to think, oh, yes, giving some money is just the thing to do? What shall we tell them?
What should we tell them? Well, I think we've done really well with these online retreats.
Well, they've been fantastic, haven't they?
Have you enjoyed them?
I've been amazed at how it is possible to make connections with people, even though, you know, where we are in little boxes on a screen. And the people have managed to bring themselves in so well.
Yeah.
It really has been marvellous to be part of that.
And loads of people are getting ordained still. Loads of women are getting ordained.
And do you know what? Loads of people are asking to be ordained as well, because that's one of my jobs here, is to sign up and write to people who are requesting ordination. So all of those things are continuing to happen.
Despite the lockdown and all of that.
Yeah. And here we are really busy doing all of those things.
Yeah.
Signing people up to join the training for ordination process.
Yes.
Making sure that the people who come on retreat really understand what's going on. And then, of course, also we're talking to people on the phone in between times, aren't we? And just kind of keeping up to date with our friends and all that stuff.
Yeah, quite busy actually, quite a lot of things to do.
But
yeah, what?
At the end of July, what's going to happen, we hope?
We hope. Everything crossed.
Everything crossed.
we hope we're going to open again.
Yeah, I do hope so.
I really hope so. September at the very latest.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we hope by the end of July. So that's fab, and it'd be wonderful to have people back here, won't it, through the doors. But we are a bit short of money as a result.
And if we open up at maybe by September at the latest, would that help financially?
I think it will make a difference. Pranagita's our treasurer. She was saying it will make a difference, but we're still looking to make a loss of about 20 grand this year.
Even if everything's full and everybody's on retreat.
Yeah, so we
20,000
is quite a lot to lose, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So we do need donations, basically. Yeah. So that's what we're asking you.
That's where you come in.
That's where you come in. Yeah. If you feel inspired to help us in this kind of way financially, it will make a difference. And ideally, what would really, really help is if you could give something on a regular basis. A one-off donation's great, by the way. If you can afford a one-off donation, that is great. But if you could afford to give something less, but on a regular basis, the reason that's more helpful is because it enables us to plan. We know, what we're getting in, and we can plan.
So we know that there is an income that we can rely on, and we can build onto the program.
Yeah. And I was thinking, because you remember when you and I used to do Karana appeals and you used to suggest a certain amount. I was thinking of suggesting £20 a month. If you could afford £20, does that sound too much?
No. I was rather thinking the reverse.
What were you thinking?
I mean, for some people, of course, £20 a month is a considerable ask, and I realise that. But actually, many people now, if they are in work, can afford more than £20 a month.
Right.
If it's something that you feel is very, very valuable, and you can see, of course, that it's of value to others, not only to yourself.
Well, that's true.
So it's a question of thinking, well, it's only us and this community that can be giving that money. Nobody from outside the Buddhist field can be doing that, because they're not going to understand what we need the money for.
So are we saying that if people felt that they wanted to give more than £20 a month, that we wouldn't think that they were being ostentatious?
Absolutely not.
In fact, we'd be quite grateful.
We would be very, very grateful.
But I also want to say that even if £20 a month does feel too much, even a more modest amount, what you can afford that expresses your kind of inspiration, your feeling for the project, the inspiration for the project, whatever you can afford, no amount's too small. Just give what you can.
And it's your
thing.
trust in the project and the process as well that's
Yes.
expressed in that giving.
Yes.
And I think that Vajratara is going to display one of the links so that it's easy for you to know how to do that. Thank you very much,
Thank
everybody.
you. And enjoy the rest of the weekend.
Brilliant.